So, why would we study philosophy? Well, of course, philosophy does relate to questions of faith. It does because questions of faith are questions about what is the case, and what is important. Arguments, philosophical arguments, sometimes persuade people not to be Christian, to change their faith, if you will. So such arguments must be studied. And we live in a time where we hear a lot about the new atheism, which of course, for those of us who have read the philosophical tradition, does not seem to be a very new atheism at all, but basically updated arguments from the 18th century, arguments that were nicely put by David Hume, 1711 to 1776, in the Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion. Most of these arguments that we see out on the contemporary scene, although the content is somewhat different, the form of the arguments are basically the same. And there are arguments against purpose, teleology, arguments trying to show that kind of a mechanism accounts for all things, or an indeterminate kind of processing that is not pulled forward by any purpose or meaning can account for the variegated experiences we have and the variegated objects that exist in the universe. Well, at any rate, arguments should be studied, I believe, because obviously in the study of arguments one finds where they're strong and when they're weak. Philosophy can put our faith at risk because it can ask critical questions of the faith. Perhaps somebody believes, oh yeah, everything came from God. What other way would it have come about if God didn't create from nothing? Creatio ex nihilo. But of course there are other accounts of this, and there are problems with the creatio ex nihilo account because it's not immediately clear that this helps us philosophically in answering the question. So much of it has to do with what we take to be a sufficient reason why things are what they are. Anyway, philosophy can put our faith at risk, and in so doing, sometimes it makes us look at our faith deeper. It makes us examine our presuppositions more clearly, and the doubt sometimes brings about greater chances of faith. When I was a kid, I thought that doubt was the opposite of faith. That faith over here, yay, doubt, bad. But of course, that's not the way it is at all. In any good marriage, right, there is both the way that things are, the faith that the partners have, and then there's sometimes little tensions that develop that create deeper connections. And of course, we know this to be the case in marriage and relationship, and certainly I think it's the case in Christian faith as well. So philosophy is important in the study of theology, as I pointed out last time. Theology presupposes ontology. Ontology is that word. It's not primarily a word having to do with data structures that's sometimes used, I see now. Ontology is that study of philosophy concerned with being, right? Truths about God presuppose being. And philosophy investigates being. So if philosophy is investigating being and God has being, there is some connection between God and ontology, and by extension God and philosophy, theology and philosophy. Theologians of the tradition knew philosophy very well, much more deeply than theologians these days, I believe. So to understand their theology, that is, if we want to understand patristic theology, we must understand the philosophy that they knew, or we're not going to be able to catch the illusions that they make. We're only going to be able to read the surface of what they say. I mentioned last time some of the ways in which philosophy is relevant to theology. It's relevant in terms of metaphysics and ontology. I want to talk about that in just a little different way than last time. Epistemology, this is the subject having to do with knowledge, the extent and the means of our knowledge. Semantics and the philosophy of language. Semantics has to do with the truth of propositions and their meaning. The philosophy of religion, we'll talk briefly about that. The philosophy of science, we'll talk briefly about that. And also the field of ethics. So all of these subsections of philosophy are relevant to theological investigation. And this is where I want to leave off on this very small and short lecture, and I'll be back with you next time. Thank you.